My group was agricultural health and safety, and also sorry, my heater just kicked on like so loud. Um, in Sydney's presentation, she did a really good job, which you haven't seen yet, but she introduces like this agricultural, like conceptual framework between agricultural workers and safety. So it's a great visual for looking at all the connections between ag and health, but I'll be focusing on the link between agricultural producers, farmers, and workers to the labor process, and then the labor process to the occupational health risks. Sydney's presentation kind of focuses on the consumer effects and like antibiotic resistance, and then my other group member, Aubriana, will look into environmental health and agriculture. And these are all, and they're all important, but like I said, I'll be focusing on like the occupational hazards. So there's all types of occupational hazards, and it affects many different people. My presentation is going to look at like how dangerous it is, like what makes it dangerous, who is affected, and then kind of steps being taken to mitigate that. So like ag workers are exposed to many hazards and risks in their daily work hours. They can get infections from being in close contact with animals or livestock. A large scale example of this being how the swine flu was traced back to a pig farm in Mexico. Farmers working in grain bins can become engulfed in the contents inside and suffocate. They can breathe in like grain particles, and that can give them respiratory issues. Machinery can be really dangerous, such as shop tools and tractors. Like tractors can roll. They're also exposed to extreme weather. Like we've had currently really cold, extreme cold weather here in Iowa City, and then farmers are also working in the summer when it's, temperatures can well surpass 100 degrees. And then a lot of the equipment can also be really loud, and that can, like repeated noise exposure can lead to hearing issues and even hearing loss. They're also exposed to many pesticides and herbicides, and these can have a lot of negative effects on users, such as cancer from like long exposure, or just like having it touch the skin can leave burns and abrasions on it. And a lot of agricultural jobs require repetitive motions, and this can lead to musculoskeletal injuries. So like while farming is really important, it is, like we just saw, very dangerous. And it is actually, in the United States, it's like the 8th most dangerous industry to work in, according to the fatality rate per 100,000 workers. My chart on the left, you can see that the fatal work injury rate is 23.2 out of the 100,000 full-time workers. And I think I saw that in 2020, it's dropped a little bit to like 20.3, but that data hasn't been like officially published yet. And like I said, this is for only the United States. And industrialized countries, the agricultural workers make up like a way lower percent of the workforce than they do in like developing nations. My circle graph on the right, you can see that. So like in industrialized nations, it's only 9%, but in developing countries, it's almost 60% of the workforce is made up of agricultural workers. And then across the entire world, it's about 50% of the global workforce population. So that's a really big number of people working in a really dangerous profession. But we also have to keep in mind that a lot of these risks can depend on where the work is being done. Different countries have different access to chemicals, they have different standards, different access to equipment, or different weather. So they all see kind of different issues. The Bureau of Labor Statistics in the United States has done many surveys to gain insight on farming injuries and demographics. So I made a couple of pie charts using the data from the 2014 survey responses, because those were the most recent ones. So obviously, like, farming is hard work, and you can see that when you look at the injury event chart. Like overexertion and body reaction is the main type of like thing that leads to injuries in agriculture. But like falls and trips and then equipment issues are close behind, and those make up big portions as well. Exposure to harmful substances didn't contribute enough from the survey, but that could, deal with like who responded to the survey, and it could be because of some of like the regulations that the United States has in order, like in place to kind of monitor those chemicals. The nature of injury, you can see that the largest is sprains and torn ligaments. So that kind of, goes right with the overexertion, just kind of like overuse injuries. Fractures and cuts also make up large injury types. And then a lot of like 20% of the respondents had, or like other injuries, and then almost 10% had multiple injuries. So a lot of, people just having their bodies kind of go through it in this line of work. So, and then just kind of into more of like the demographics in the United States, men make up about 70% of the agricultural workers, but like women are still a part of it, and they can face more specific challenges, such as, challenges with pregnancy. They can, have miscarriages and premature deliveries from exposure to pesticides. And then on my presentation, I put the male age group distribution from the Bureau of Labor Statistics surveys, but it was really similar, the male and female. The largest group being 45 plus, but it's almost, it's pretty close to an equal fourths for like all the 4 age groups. And this survey went down to 14 years old, but a lot of kids even younger than that are working in ag. So it's an issue that affects, all age groups. It's really well, like everyone is kind of exposed to it, and it's like a very encompassing industry. Also, there's minorities and stuff in there, but they did a separate survey for just like Hispanic minorities. But according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they only make up 6% of the agricultural workforce in the United States. So, and they're encompassed in like these 2 large pie graphs that I have here. But like even around the world, like that data has focused on the United States, but across the world, about 75% of the agricultural workers are actually in Asia and the Pacific. So the occupational hazards of agriculture, are very obviously global issues. They affect farmers in every region, like I said, and they can have different risks. And there really hasn't been that many like international like pushes to kind of address these issues. There have been a few international conferences to meet about the hazards, but there's like no big set of like international guidelines, and there's no like big current like government efforts, I don't think, to like address this. It's generally handled on national and like personal levels. Switzerland has a safe work program, which like worked with the International Labor Office, and they kind of talked about the need for this stuff, and kind of brought to attention. And then they've also like published a lot of stuff about it, and that's where some like this graphic on this slide came from. But like I said, it is mostly focused on like the national and personal levels. So here in the United States, regular OSHA regulations for a safe workplace are required for farms with over 10 employees. But other than that, there is not many agricultural specific rules or regulations. ROPs, which are rollover protected structures, are required now on all tractors built after 1976, and that go over 20 horsepower. So that's kind of a step being taken to mitigate the hazards from, tractors rolling. Like I said, pesticides are something that are pretty regulated. This is through the Worker Protection Standards, which is under the EPA, and this includes, safety training being required for pesticide use, PPE having to be used, logging pesticides, and keeping pesticides properly labeled. And then there's also a field sanitation standard that has to be kept. This requires employers to provide toilets, sinks, water, and then give their employees reasonable access to all of this. And that's just to prevent issues from, farmers not being able to wash their hands, or, a lot of times they'll try and work and hold in like their urine, and then they get bladder infections. So those kind of steps taken to address that. OSHA also produces many like informational tools. So they're not actually regulated, but they do help kind of give farmers the tools to make the right decisions. On the slide, I have an example of like a wallet card about grain bin safety. And then they also publish, fall protection information and education as well. And then a lot of it is still left up to, using that information and then taking personal steps. So some of the personal steps that farmers can take to mitigate the risks are using PPE, such as like ear protection, like the little things that you shove in your ears, or have the headphones. And then wearing gloves when you're working with power tools, so that way your fingers don't get caught. Dust masks to keep those particles out. Weather appropriate clothing, light clothing and hats in the summer, or bundling up in the winter to avoid frostbite. Following equipment recommendations, like only having one rider on ATV, putting a helmet on, and then also, getting preventative medicine in order to kind of help prevent some of those musculoskeletal injuries, like doing physical therapy right when you notice any issues. And there's my references.